People think the greatest danger of living alone at 91 is a rug that slips or a heart that stops. They are wrong. The real danger isn't physical. It's the quiet, systematic way the world starts to erase you while you are still standing. It begins with a look, a tilt of the head from your children that suggests you are no longer a person, but a precarious vase about to shatter. I saw that look on a Tuesday in November, and it chilled me more than the winter air ever could. The house was quiet, the way it has been since Owen passed, but it was a comfortable silence until the doorbell rang. It wasn't the mailman or a neighbor. It was my daughter, Evelyn, and she wasn't alone. She had that specific, terrifying brightness in her eyes that people use when they are about to tell you something, for your own good. I stood there, clutching the doorframe, realizing that the walls I had lived in for 50 years were suddenly under siege. She didn't come in to ask how I was. She came in to assess the problem. She walked through my kitchen, eyes darting to the pile of mail on the counter and the slightly dusty baseboards. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, calculating the risk of my existence. It was the same look she used when she decided to put her childhood dog down, and a cold knot formed in my stomach. "Mom," she began, and that single word carried the weight of a closing casket. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, its edges crisp and official. She didn't know it yet, but that folder was the first shot fired in a war for my soul. As she cleared her throat to speak, I realized she wasn't just bringing news, she was bringing an end. But the end she had planned was nothing compared to the secret I was about to discover. I'm telling you this not because I want your pity, but because I need a witness. Most people my age are tucked away behind closed doors, their stories replaced by medical charts and safety plans. But I'm still here. I'm still fighting for the right to be seen. If you believe that a person's worth doesn't expire when they hit 80 or 90, if you believe that we shouldn't be managed like problems but respected like legends, then I'm asking you to stand with me. Subscribe and stay in this kitchen with me, not for my sake, but so that when it's your turn to face the look, you'll remember that Rina George didn't go quietly. You'll need to know what happened next. Because what I discovered in the coming weeks didn't just save my house. It changed the lives of 3 people who had been forgotten by the world. Don't leave me in this quiet house alone. Click that button and let's show them we're still here. The folder hit the table with a thud that sounded like a gavel. Evelyn sat me down, her husband Noah standing behind her like a silent guard. They didn't see a woman who had raised 4 children and managed a household budget through 3 recessions. They saw liability. "We've been talking, Mom," she said, and the we told me everything I needed to know. This was a conspiracy of love, which is the most dangerous kind of conspiracy there is. They presented me with 3 options, but as I looked at them, I realized they weren't choices at all. They were exit ramps. Option 1 was moving in with them, a guest room that would eventually become a cell. Option 2 was a live-in stranger. Option 3, the one they whispered, was the community. Each one was designed to strip away the one thing that kept me tethered to this earth, my agency. I looked over at Owen's green armchair, the one with the worn armrests where his hands used to sit. To Noah, it was a piece of junk that clashed with the curtains. To me, it was the place where my husband told me he loved me for the last time. If I moved, the chair stayed, and if the chair stayed, Owen was truly gone. I felt a sudden, fierce urge to scream, but I kept my face as still as stone. Evelyn was watching me, waiting for the inevitable surrender she expected. She started talking about safety and peace of mind, but all I heard was the sound of a door locking from the outside. I knew I had to play along, to buy myself time to think, even if it meant stepping into the trap they had set. I took a deep breath and agreed to the first trial, not realizing that the guest room at Evelyn's held a horror I hadn't anticipated. The first 8 weeks at Evelyn's house were an exercise in slow-motion erasure. On the surface, it was perfect. The bed was soft, the meals were hot, and the house was filled with the sounds of my great-grandson Liam. But beneath the surface, I was a ghost. I was a guest in a life I didn't build, sleeping in a room that smelled of lavender and synthetic freshness instead of the wood smoke and old books of my own home. I quickly learned the invisible rules of being a managed parent. Don't leave your shoes in the hallway. Don't use the kitchen at 5 a.m. because you'll wake Noah. I found myself sitting in the dark, waiting for the sun to rise. Paralyzed by the fear of being a burden, I was no longer Rina George. I was a schedule problem that needed to be worked around. The only light was Liam. He would crawl into my lap with the sticky, honest affection of a 4-year-old, unaware that I was a problem to be solved. One afternoon, while I was holding him, I heard Noah's voice through the thin walls of the kitchen. He wasn't being mean, but what he said about the bathroom schedule and the extra laundry cut deeper than any insult. I realized that my presence was a weight they were struggling to carry. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, realizing that safety was just another word for invisible. I had been there 2 months, and already I could feel my edges blurring, my voice getting quieter. I knew if I stayed, I would eventually disappear entirely. I called Evelyn into the room the next morning with a decision that changed the trajectory of the entire winter, but I wasn't prepared for the helper she had waiting in the wings. I moved back home, but I wasn't alone. Evelyn had insisted on option 2, Melissa. She was a professional caregiver, a woman with a brisk walk and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Within 20 minutes of her arrival, my kitchen, the room where I had danced with Owen and cried over my mother's passing, was no longer mine. It was a workspace, and I was the inventory. Melissa was a benevolent dictator. She moved the salt to a higher shelf because she decided my blood pressure was a concern. She changed the TV channel because my programs were too depressing. She called me sweetie in a tone you'd use for a particularly slow toddler. Every time she spoke, I felt a piece of my dignity being chipped away by her clinical efficiency. The worst part was the silence. Not the silence of being alone, but the silence of being ignored while someone is in the room. She would hum to herself while she scrubbed my counters, treating my memories like clutter that needed to be organized. I sat in my green armchair, watching her rearrange my life, and I realized that I was paying a stranger to make me feel like a trespasser in my own home. By the 3rd week, I looked at the agency bills and realized this independence was going to bankrupt me before the year was out. I was trapped between a daughter who was afraid for me and a caregiver who was indifferent to me. I told Evelyn we had to look at the last option, the facility. I thought I was ready to give up, but then I walked into the community and saw something that made my blood run cold. The Autumn Willows Senior Living Community was painted in cheerful, non-threatening pastels. The air smelled of industrial lemon and hidden despair. Evelyn walked beside me, her hand on my elbow as if I might bolt at any second, and she was right. A young woman with a bright yellow clipboard met us at the door, her smile so wide it looked painful. "We have so many activities for our residents," she chirped. She showed me the social room where a group of people sat in a circle, staring at a television they weren't watching. She pointed to a calendar on the wall. 9 a.m., stretches, 12 p.m., nutrition, 2 p.m., film, 4 p.m., social hour. I looked at that list and felt a wave of nausea. At 91, I have outlived world wars, depressions, and more politicians than I can count. I have earned the right to be antisocial whenever I damn well please. The young woman led us to a room that was supposed to be mine. It was a box with a window overlooking a parking lot. No kitchen, no green armchair, just a board on the wall where they would write my name and my needs. She started explaining the safety features of the bathroom, but all I could see was the end of the line. This wasn't a community. It was a waiting room for the inevitable. "I'm not ready," I whispered. Evelyn looked at me, her eyes filling with tears of frustration. "Mom, there are no other options," she said, her voice cracking. I looked at the girl with the clipboard, then at the sterile, empty room, and a spark of the old Rina flared to life. I walked out of that building without a word, but as I stepped onto my porch that evening, a collision was waiting for me that would rewrite my entire future. I walked out of that facility today with nothing but my pride and a house that my daughter thinks is a cage. To the girl with the clipboard, I was just a room number. To the system, I'm just a ticking clock. But sitting here in this kitchen talking to you, I feel like Rina George again. Every time one of you hits that like button, it's like a signal fire in the dark. It tells the world and the algorithms that run it that stories like mine still matter, that we aren't invisible yet. If you've ever felt like the world was trying to decide your future for you, please subscribe. Don't let this story end in a sterile hallway with a clipboard. I'm doing something radical in the next chapter, something Evelyn would call dangerous, and I need to know you're still with me before I take that leap. And please, tell me where you are watching from in the comments. I've spent so many nights in this quiet house feeling like the last person on earth, knowing that my voice is reaching you, in your kitchen, in your car, in your city. It makes these walls feel a little less lonely. Let's show them how big our village really is. Because what happened next at the mailbox, it wasn't just a coincidence. It was a rescue. The November wind was biting as I walked to the end of my driveway to get the mail. It was a small task, but these days, it was my only remaining act of rebellion. That's when I saw her. The house next door had been empty for months, but a beat-up station wagon was now idling in the drive. A young woman, Lily, was wrestling with a stroller, 2 bags of groceries, and a screaming toddler named Henry. She looked like she was about to snap. Her hair was a mess, her coat was half unzipped, and she was trying to keep a 7-year-old girl, Nora, from running into the street. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated chaos. In that moment, she didn't see a vulnerable senior. When she looked at me, she saw a pair of hands. "Can you hold this?" she gasped, thrusting a grocery bag toward me. I took the bag. It was heavy, filled with milk and cheap cereal, but the weight felt wonderful. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one being helped. I was the helper. I watched as she finally got Henry settled and Nora inside. She stood on the sidewalk, chest heaving, and looked at me with a raw vulnerability that matched my own. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm a disaster." "No," I said, and for the first time in a long time, my voice sounded strong. "You're just outnumbered." We stood there in the cold for a moment, 2 women at opposite ends of their lives, both drowning in different ways. She told me she had lost her job and her childcare in the same week. I went back inside my quiet, empty house, but the silence felt different now. I realized Lily had something I needed, and I had something she was desperate for. But the third option I was about to propose was a risk that could lose me everything. It started with a key under the mat. A few days after the mailbox incident, there was a frantic knock on my door at 6 a.m. It was Lily. Henry had a fever, and she had an interview for a job she couldn't afford to miss. She didn't ask if I was capable or if it was safe. She just asked if I could sit with him. "I have no one else, Rina," she said, her voice trembling. I sat in my green armchair for 4 hours with a feverish 18-month-old asleep on my chest. The professionals would have said it was too much for a woman my age. Evelyn would have had a heart attack. But as I felt Henry's small, rhythmic breaths against my heart, I felt a pulse of life return to my own body. I wasn't a schedule problem to this child. I was a sanctuary. By the end of the week, the arrangement had become a routine. Nora would come over after school and do her homework at my kitchen table while I made tea. I began to realize that Lily was being erased by the world just as much as I was. For, isolated by poverty and single motherhood, we were two sides of the same coin, discarded by a society that only values people who are productive. One evening, Lily sat in my kitchen, her head in her hands. She told me she couldn't pay her rent. She was going to have to move back to her mother's basement in another state. My heart plummeted. If she left, the silence would return and the autumn willow clipboard would be waiting for me. I looked at the vast, empty upstairs of my house and a plan began to form, a plan so radical that Evelyn would never allow it. Did you know the dinosaurs, Rina? Nora asked one afternoon, her eyes wide with genuine curiosity. I laughed, a real deep laugh that I hadn't felt in years. Not quite, dear, but I remember when the world was black and white, I teased. She didn't treat me with the gentle condescension of the nursing home staff. She treated me like a living library, a source of truth in a world that felt increasingly confusing to her. She asked why my hands shook, and I told her the truth, because they've carried a lot of heavy things, and they're a little tired. She nodded, satisfied with the answer. In this kitchen, I wasn't a patient, I was an elder. I taught her how to fold laundry with precision and how to make a potato soup that could cure a broken heart. I was passing on a legacy that no activity coordinator could ever understand. While Lily was out working her new part-time shifts, the house transformed. The quiet was replaced by the clatter of toys and the hum of a 7-year-old's questions. I found that I was walking more, moving faster, and forgetting to check the clock. My safety wasn't coming from handrails or medication. It was coming from the fact that someone actually needed me to get out of bed in the morning. But the pressure from Evelyn was mounting. She had seen the community and was pushing for a move-in date in December. She didn't know about the children. She didn't know about the village I was building. I knew I had to tell her, but I also knew that the moment I did, she would try to shut it down. I sat down that night with a pencil and a piece of paper, doing a type of math I hadn't done in decades. I invited Evelyn and Noah over on a Sunday. I didn't serve them tea. I served them a proposal. I've looked at the numbers, I said, laying a sheet of paper on the table. The cost of the community was staggering, nearly $5,000 a month. The cost of a live-in caregiver was even higher. I showed them that in 2 years, my savings would be gone, and I would be a financial burden on them. Then I told them about Lily. I told them about the empty bedrooms upstairs, and the young woman who was working 2 jobs and still couldn't afford a safe place for her children. I'm not going to a nursing home, I said, my voice steady. Lily and the children are moving in. She will provide the legs and the heavy lifting, and I will provide the house and the child care. We are sponsoring each other. Evelyn's face went through a dozen emotions, shock, anger, and then finally that familiar fear. Mom, she's a stranger. It's not safe. What if you fall? I looked her in the eye. If I fall in a nursing home, a stranger with a clipboard will find me. If I fall here, a woman who loves me and a child who needs me will find me. I'll take my chances with the love. Noah was looking at the numbers, and for the first time I saw him nod. He understood the math, but Evelyn wasn't convinced. She saw it as a temporary madness, a desperate old woman clinging to a fantasy. She stood up to leave, telling me we would talk about it when I was thinking clearly. But she didn't realize that Lily was already at the door with the first box of books. And the third option was no longer a plan, it was a reality. It's been 6 months since Lily, Nora, and Henry moved in. The house is no longer quiet. There are plastic dinosaurs on the coffee table and milk stains on the rug, and I have never been happier. Evelyn still worries. It's her job. But even she can't deny the color that has returned to my cheeks. I'm not a problem anymore. I'm the matriarch of a very strange, very beautiful little tribe. I look at the clock. It's 2 p.m. In the community, I would be sitting in a sterile room watching a film I didn't choose. Here I am sitting in Owen's green armchair, watching Henry discover that he can make a sound by banging 2 spoons. Together, I am deciding what to do with my afternoon, and that right is the most precious thing I own. It is the last essential freedom. If you are watching this because you are scared to live alone, or because you love someone who is, I want you to stop looking at the brochures. I want you to stop looking at the options they give you and start looking at the people around you. The world is full of lonely young people and lonely old people, and we are all just waiting for someone to hold the grocery bag. Don't let them erase you. Don't let them turn your life into a schedule. Before you sign those papers, walk to the end of your block. Find the person who looks as tired as you feel. Because at 91, I've learned that the best way to stay safe isn't to build a wall. It's to open a door. Now, if you'll excuse me, it's 4 p.m., and I have a very important social hour with a 7-year-old that involves absolutely no clipboards. I'm 91 years old, and for the first time in a long time, I'm not looking at the clock. I'm looking at a future. My house is messy, my kitchen is loud, and my heart is full. We've proven that the third option isn't just a dream. It's a lifeline for a world that has forgotten how to take care of its own. But I know I'm one of the lucky ones. Right now, as you're watching this, there's another woman sitting in a quiet house, staring at a nursing home brochure with tears in her eyes. There is another young mother like Lily crying in her car because she has no one to help her. They don't know that there is a better way. I'm asking you to share this video, not for me, but for them. Be the person who puts this story in front of someone who needs to know they aren't finished yet. You might be the reason someone decides to open their door instead of locking it. If this story moved you, please like the video and subscribe to this channel. By joining us, you're helping me keep this voice loud enough for the clipboard carriers to hear. You're becoming a part of our village. Thank you for sitting in my kitchen with me. Thank you for listening, because as long as you're watching, I'm never truly living alone. Now, go find your neighbor. They've been waiting for you.